Okay, I'm hoping that this is working and that everybody can hear me. We're just, let's see here, I'm just getting everything set up and I'm hoping I did everything right. And yeah, just comment with hi if you can hear me, let me know. And that will be very helpful. I see everybody's chatting here. Thank you for waiting patiently while I get everything set up. You can see I have 4 palettes set out. I'm just going to set some of those aside and we'll be about ready to get started here. Lots of echoes. I'm going to be a little closer to the mic in a minute. Hopefully that will help. Okay, I'm just getting myself set up. Let's pop that up. I like to have it set so I can see my comments and my screen at this and my video surface, my painting surface at the same time. And I think I'm just about ready, you guys. And then we'll get painting. I'm incredibly nervous. I'm not sure why. I've done these live broadcasts many times before, and yet, you know, it's a little unnerving every time, just hoping that everything will work out. Okay. Now, I'm closer to the microphone. I'm not going to touch my computer again for a while, so now you should be able to hear me. Hopefully there aren't any awful echoes anymore. And then we can get started. First of all, I just want to welcome you all. I've got people from all over the place. I'm doing a morning broadcast, which I don't usually do because I'm usually busy with my family in the mornings. I homeschool my kids, and so that's usually our mornings. But I wanted to have 2 different times for my live broadcasts so that I could have a chance to talk to some people who maybe are sleeping usually when I do an afternoon broadcast. So it's nice to see so many people tuning in from Europe. And I'm just pulling out a few brushes here, way more than I usually use, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And if I'm just seeing, I've got one person saying they're having trouble with echoes and repeating. If you're having trouble with the sound, I think try even just closing out the video window and logging in again. Sometimes you just need to reset on your end, and hopefully that will help. I'm going to pull out one more palette here and just moisten that with some paint. You don't really need to spray your palette before you start if you use a really juicy brush like I do, but I like to spray it because it just makes things a little bit faster. And I've got a beautiful sheet of paper here. This is Arsh's 140-pound cold press, and this is about a 1/4 sheet size, which is 11 by 15 inches. And I like to work in this size because for me, I'm just finding you get a freer brush stroke. I know a lot of you like to paint small, you know, take a 1/4 of this. And the only problem with that, and I talked about this with my local students, I had a class last night, the problem with working really small postcard size is that you tend to work very cramped with your brush. So when you're painting in a small area, you're making small strokes, you're using small movements. And when I like to paint freely and expressively, I want to use, you know, more flowing strokes and movements. So I like to use a bigger sheet of paper. Okay, so I just mentioned I did have a local class last night and we had so much fun. I wish you guys could all come to one of my local workshops because we just have a really good time. This is something we painted last night. We were concentrating on the concept of painting simple landscapes, and we just did this very fluid sky, and then we started just adding a little bit of land down below, and it's amazing how little you need to do to create a beautiful simple landscape. what I found with this one is actually this whole clump of trees, bushes here, was intended to cover up a bloom that had been created. They were asking me about creating blooms in watercolor, that ugly edge that happens when you've got water fighting against pigment that's starting to dry, an imbalance of fluidity. And so I showed them how it was done, and sometimes you go to try to show what not to do and you end up not being able to duplicate the mistake. But in this case, I had this huge bloom right over here and it was so ugly. I didn't know how to make it work in my painting, so we covered it up with trees. And I do so often in a painting, you make mistakes, and I don't know if I've ever painted a perfect painting. And so what I'm always doing is reacting to what's happening the paper. So we're going to do some and reacting today. And I've been thinking a lot about trees in my watercolor paintings, talking about trees, thinking about how to paint trees better, and how to make them more artistic in my scene. And oh good, Louisa, you got sound again. That's good to see. And first of all, I want to thank you guys for those of you who've already purchased my Tree Clinic course. And you feel free to say I bought it if you did. I turned on opened up the course last night before I went to bed. It was already today in the East, and so I decided I could open up enrollment, even though it wasn't quite midnight my time. And when I woke up this morning, I already had probably about 20 enrollments, and they've just kept growing from there. And I wish I could lock the focus on this camera. It has a hard time focusing on white paper, so I'll keep a brush there on the paper. I can't set the focus, so it doesn't want to autofocus with the setting I have on this software. I have someone saying I bought it at 4 a.m. That's an early riser. Actually, I sometimes get up in the middle of the night to upload video courses because then I don't have to pay extra for using up all my bandwidth every month. And but anyhow, so just thank you very much for your great response to my new course. It's really exciting to see people so eager to make a purchase and to learn from what I have to share. It's whenever I make a course, I try to really throw in everything I can think of that I've learned, and sometimes it just doesn't feel like maybe very much, and so I always have a little bit of performance anxiety. But I'm just really exciting to see you guys' response. I should mention as well, it was pointed out to me that one of the lessons is incomplete. You'll see part 1 of the Summer Oak tutorial. Part 2 will be uploaded, I think, tonight. I just somehow missed. There's always some kind of little error in there. And so I just missed uploading it. There is more information on painting that summer tree, and you will see it very soon. Just throwing down a sky here on my paper. And this is very nice and glossy wet, so you can see as soon as I touch the pigment, it wants to start moving. And we've talked a lot about, in my local class, we've been talking a lot about how much water to use. When you're working with beginners, that's a big question. And when you want that nice fluid effect, a really good way to know if you have enough water or not is just dot that color in. And does it start flowing out immediately? Then you know you've got lots of nice juicy fluid. And you're going to be able to work with adding color in and letting it move around. So this is just Verditer blue on clean white paper. Not that clean, there's a dirty fingerprint right over there. We'll cover that up with paint. And we're going to make our sky a little bit more interesting today. So I'm going to add a little bit of pink, and I'm going to grab some quinacridone magenta. And it's almost too pink. I want a very soft pink sky, and that's definitely too pink. And I don't panic when I add too much color. I just start adding water. And as I add water, that gives that pink some fluidity, and that gives it some movement across the page. And so as it moves across the page, it grows paler. And I actually want it to be even paler than that. So I'm just going to very gently tease that color right down, and I'll keep moving it downward. And now it's getting very soft. I want it to mix with the blue a little bit, and the blue doesn't seem to want to mix with the pink really, so I'm going to put a little more fresh blue in there, the Verditer blue, and just dot that in and let it flow as well. And pink and blue are such good friends. They get along. You mix them and you'll get a lovely violet, which is perfectly at home in any sky. I have a hard time not just going for those strong contrasts. Now, one color that's not a good friend of pink, but is really nice in a sky, is yellow. And so I'm going to grab a little cadmium yellow, and I'm going to dot it in where I laid the pink down. And woo, that's really bright. And of course, when yellow and blue mix, you start to get green. So when you're working with a sky and you're adding yellow and blue, I try to keep them from getting too cozy. And actually, I have seen green in a sky. It does happen because, you know, there are times when you've got those blue clouds and the yellow glow and there is just some greenery going on there. But I find that people tend to not really like the look of a green sky, and so I try to not let those colors mix. And I had a big bead of water there, and I could either blot it or just flow it right downward, and I think I'll just let it flow downward. Now, most of my interesting colors are happening over here. This is really boring, so let's add some color over there. More yellow. And maybe even a little more of that pink. Oop. I'm working a little cramped because I'm trying to keep everything in the video in the frame of the camera. And so I feel a little crowded with palettes and paper and lighting and camera all clustered together here. And so I'm really just letting the color flow organically on the page, and that's giving me a really soft, interesting effect. And I have a question why I'm using cadmium yellow. That's a good question. I don't know. I just thought it's nice and light and bright. And my new gamboge, which is right over here, was kind of grubby, so I didn't feel like cleaning it. So it was just a mood thing. And now I'm just dotting in a little water because I want to create some cloudy effects. And this is that whole bloom situation that we talked about. Once things start to lose their shine, and that's really moving right there, you've got this dampness on your paper, and when you create this imbalance of water by dripping water in, that's what creates a bloom. And that's going to be right dead center in the middle of my page and very unattractive. So let's give it some friends so it's not all alone. I have this toothbrush. It was my nephew's and I stole it. He had to buy a new one because I was on a trip and I needed a toothbrush for spatter. So what are a few cavities when art is on the line? Okay, so I just used my toothbrush to spatter, and because there was that, it was really losing its fluidity up here and it's just damp, then the water didn't move as much. If it was still very wet here, that water wouldn't have done much. If I spatter down here where it's very wet still, the water's not really going to do anything, but I think that's kind of cool. And I don't know, I'm just having fun. So we're going to let that do its little spatter thing and create some texture. Now I'm just going to, we have been talking about trees, and now that I've played with my sky for a while, I'm going to do some trees. And the brush I'm using today is my current favorite. It's a Princeton 4950 round brush. Number 16 is the size. And the tip is starting to wear down, so I'll be upgrading that one soon. I'm going to grab another beautiful light, bright color, which is my green gold. And this is where we start to think about our horizon and our land. And because I'm putting it right in that wet area, it's going to bleed. So I'm going to have a fuzzy edge. And I think that it can be so fun to create a simple landscape. And if you're wanting to improve your landscape paintings, I would challenge you to think about doing a 5-minute landscape every day. And when I say 5-minute landscape, I mean what are you going to get done? Basically, you're going to do a sky, you're going to do land, and you're going to leave it at that. Undersea green going in a little bit here. Maybe I'm going too dark too soon. Another fun color. It's a really rattly palette. is quinacridone gold. It feels a little more earthy to me, like I wouldn't probably use it in a sky. And but it's just a beautiful, warm, kind of earthy yellow. I like little zigzaggy brush strokes. They're kind of a trademark of mine. Take some of that green. And because everything's wet, you can see it flowing and soft and interesting. So there I have really the most basic landscape you're going to get. You've got sky, you've got land. But, you know, we don't need to stop there because we've been talking about trees. And so maybe I want to do some trees off in the distance. And I'm going to show you a new color that I've just started using. And actually, I've owned it for a while. Didn't really like it at first. Jean Haynes made me rethink my thoughts on Cascade Green. And you can see it's going in, it's kind of a blue green. It's kind of soft and pastel-y to me. I'm just very damp. It's very damp here still, so I can dot, and you can see this interesting line. Cascade Green, I didn't like it because it is so bluey green. It's kind of like a girly kind of army green, I don't know. But as it dries, you start to see some blue undertones, and that's really interesting. It can do some interesting things. I'm going to grab some undersea green now and dot that in. Maybe that'll kind of toughen up some of that softness in my green. And because I'm going along this curve here, I'm not going straight, it looks as though my trees that I'm painting are on a hill. And you do try to remember that when we're talking about painting landscapes. I think I just spit on my paper. That's going to create interesting texture too. When we're talking about creating interesting landscapes or creating accurate landscapes, then we have to remember that the trees, the bottoms of objects follow the contours of the land. And that's pretty, I mean, that sounds really straightforward. But that means when you have, maybe you're painting a lake and you have, the water is going to be flat on top. It always is. So if you have the edge of a lake where you're doing the shoreline, the base of the shoreline should be straight across because the top of a lake is straight across. Water doesn't really flow uphill without being a waterfall, and that's a whole nother story. So yeah, spit blooms. That will be my next mini course. How to create all kinds of interesting effects using just your saliva. You guys, I hope you understand my sense of humor. This is just getting weird. So anyhow, we just want to, I'm having fun here. I'm letting things bleed because I worked with so much water up here, and then gravity took over, and so all that color, I let it flow downward. I kept adding water to move that bead of water that was at the bottom of my sky. I kept adding water to flow that downward too. And so that gives me lots of moisture. Up here, I don't want to touch it, and you can see all that beautiful texture that's happening up there. And it's at that damp stage where if I were to touch it with paint or water or anything, it's going to create hideous edges. These are kind of pretty little blooms, but there's also hideous blooms that can happen. Kind of like when you, yesterday I was telling my students, it's kind of like if you drop a drip of food coloring on in a glass of water, it's going to flow beautifully through the water until it colors the whole water. But if you drop it on your clothes, you have an ugly stain. And so, you know, it's not in what the food coloring is, it's in what it does when you interact it with other objects. And I guess I feel that way about watercolor too. When you're dropping color into this, it's almost like a damp paper towel up here right now. That's when you start to get a jagged kind of blotchy edge instead of that lovely soft, those fingers of color that kind of come out of the bloom. And yeah, I'm getting over here, I've got undersea green and cascade green that kind of mix. The undersea green toned down that turquoise in the cascade, which I think is really pretty. And over here, the undersea green has like a little bit of red in it or something. So it kind of, when it dries, it separates, and there's this green, there's greenness, but there's also kind of this warmth to it, which is really pleasing to me. And because everything's so soft right now, it feels like it needs some crispness to me. And what I'd like to do is add some nice crisp shapes a little later. And I am getting to the stage where I'm getting to where I can't really touch it with very much color, but I think we can still do some fun things down in this area. Right here is still quite wet, so let's play with it a little bit. And so much of what I do in watercolor is just experimenting and playing and asking, what if I did this? What if I did that? And I kind of have it a little bit better than you guys, because when I'm painting for a class, I'm not painting the best piece of artwork that I've ever created. That's not my goal. My goal is to teach you guys something. And so then I can be a little bit free to make I don't know, I don't like to make mistakes when I'm doing a video class, but I can be free to kind of experiment a little bit. This next color is called Permanent Brown, and it's not really brown at all. It's kind of a rusty color, and I really like it. So let's try dotting some of that in. We're creating some weeds down here, and because of the dampness, it's damp enough that the colors, the lines are soft and bleedy, but it's dry enough, at least in this area, that you don't lose the line completely. Like here we have no lines, everything's just very soft. But where it's starting to just be damp, then we can create some lines and have them kind of stay, but be kind of soft in comparison as well. And then down here where they go onto the dry paper, then they're nice and crisp, so that we get an interesting contrast. So that's just some fun playing with color. Over here it's still pretty damp. I might even be able to go in there and add some shadows, but I think I'm going to wait. I might get to that in our second broadcast later today. I can't believe I'm doing 2 live broadcasts. This is going to be kind of fun, and it might give me the chance to finish a painting for a change. More asking what if I do a little row of dots. Can you guys, yeah, you can see that. That's kind of fun. Might use that in a painting down the road. Anyhow, what I was saying is when I'm experimenting, when I'm teaching, I'm not trying to create the best work of art ever. And I know our brains, we do this thing where we're like, okay, I'm going to make a painting. It's going to be the best thing I've ever done. I'm going to take everything I've learned, and it's just going to be the culmination of all of that skill in one grand masterpiece. And it doesn't work for me very well. I have more breakthroughs, more interesting results when I let go of trying to make a perfect painting and just start playing and asking, what if I try this? And what if I put this color in? And what if I use this brush stroke? So I really encourage you to make time in your painting every painting session to play and explore, whether it's a 5-minute landscape or a little doodle of a tree. All of those will teach you something that you can then put into a serious painting. And then some of those serious paintings will turn into, or some of those little fun sketches will turn into serious paintings that you can frame and give and win awards on, or make your famous masterpiece name. I don't know. Okay, so that was a rigger brush, actually, and I should have explained that. I've been using these. Well, this is a Princeton Neptune No. 4 rigger, but I want to show you another brush that I have here. This is a Skoda Versatile, and I believe this is a rigger as well. It's got a little bit of a fuller body. And the Versatile brushes, I have another one here. This is the No. 10 rigger. And I'm actually going to just set this whole painting right aside. We'll come back to that at 5 o'clock today. And if you can't make it to the second broadcast, I will be sharing the recording. It's at the same video link as the original broadcast, so you'll be able to watch the recording after it's finished. Okay, so anyhow, these Versatile brushes are a synthetic brush made in Barcelona. They're Spanish. And the thing I like about a rigger is you can see how much longer the body of it is in comparison, in proportion to this round brush. And what I've found is that when you're painting, And I'm going to paint without explaining too much. But when you're painting, because this is actually going to be in one of our lessons, but we're always trying to get a kind of organic, loose stroke. And a little bit of red. And the thing is that we're kind of orderly people. We want to, we end up creating patterns. And so when I'm using a long brush that's kind of, this one's kind of flicky and whippy, I don't have as much control over what those brush strokes look like. And I can use the side of my brush, pull out some color. It's getting very dark. And I start to have a little bit more of an unpredictable effect. So I can just paint myself. That's a little bit, oh, that's beautiful. This green gold, look at how it just, you put it in and it just pushes the other color and just flows. That is so pretty. I love colors that do that, where you can actually take a light color like green gold and dot that into a dark color and have it flow out. It's just wonderful. It's interesting and inspiring. And anyhow, but so I love that I can take this rigger brush with its big long body, and I don't have as much control over my brush strokes. The shape of this is getting a little out of control. Let's go a little bit skinny down here. Talking and teaching and painting or videoing, I'm such a multitasker. Dot some more red in. And that red, you can see it pushes the color a little bit too. And I need a trunk coming down. But so I like that if I know that I have a tendency to make patterns with my brush strokes, well, from my famous zigzags, you know, to creating tree branches. Well, if I know that I have that tendency, then I can look for ways to kind of cheat my way out of it. And one thing I learned last night when I was teaching my class is that this brush makes really beautiful downward strokes too. I'm just going to borrow some color from this tree because it's a little bit darker than I like over here. But look at those little spiky shapes. I can get this whole different tree effect just by flicking my brush kind of downward, and it's not super wet at this stage. And oh, it's so much fun. And I can, and what I really like and really have, oh, that's just even better. I'm just getting really excited. I did a great tree last night in my class, and I was so excited. I think my students might have been a little bit afraid of me because I kind of forgot about teaching and just played with my tree. I'm doing it again. But, and I love to demonstrate that, how you can just get caught up in your painting and you're connecting with what's happening on the paper so fully that you kind of forget that you're supposed to be making something really wonderful and just having fun. So, and this is a little bit more, it's kind of got this hairy thing going on. So I maybe am pushing this interesting brush stroke a little more than I need to. But you never know. I mean, if you do something you like, then you better try to overdo something you like, and then you'll know when to stop, hopefully, in the future. So I don't know. I mean, both of these trees have some different personality. And so I don't know, they're both good in different ways. And I like being able to show you guys that, you know, it's not just one way to paint an evergreen tree. My colors are all from Daniel Smith. Yes, at least all the ones I'm using right now. I do have some paints by Core Modern Watercolors and Winsor & Newton. In these trees, I've been using Phthalo Turquoise, Perylene Red, or Perylene Scarlet. I don't have a label written on that one. I always label the paints in my palette so I know what they are, except when I don't, when I forget to. And I'm going to find Levi's toothbrush again, and we'll see if we can add some texture in our tree with it. Oh, that's really cool. So that was fun. And you know, what we're getting here is just so much expression. And I think that's really my goal with my paintings, is rather than having flawless renderings of complicated subjects, I like expression. I want to show an interpretation of a scene that just has personality. It's interesting because it's a reflection of the person who created it, the artist. And so that's where it's really freeing to have that feeling, because you can say, you know, what if I try this? And the only criteria for whether it's a success or not is how you feel about it. And so that's, you know, if I'm following that, what makes me excited? What do I want to do more of? Then I'm just going to see what happens if I add some water and just flow everything down off the page. So when that's my criteria, then I get to be the one who decides whether something is successful or not. And it's not about whether or not other people think it looks like a tree or works within the context of the scene. It's really how I feel about it. And that's not to say that I'm just completely content with everything I make, because I'm always trying to be better and do better, create better art. But my definition of better art is art that's a more full interpretation of my own personal style, and and also shows off the skills that I've learned. Oh, I really like that. Brilliant. Like adding that green gold right at the base gives it this beautiful glow. So I'm going to add a little more green gold there. And I switched to a little rigger, which I don't think I needed to do. Okay, so there's two interesting trees. There's like a rainbow happening in this tree, which is very interesting. If I really like that little toothbrush spatter texture, I could also create texture with salt, or I could take my toothbrush and dot it in some color, maybe the undersea green, maybe a little phthalo turquoise, and spatter it across the page a little bit. That I don't like, but this is kind of interesting. And if your spatter goes a little out of control and you think it's too dark in an area, you can always spritz it with water, and that just softens it and gives it a little bit of room to flow. Okay, let's just take a few minutes to answer some questions, and then I think we'll wrap this up. I do share a little bit about these tree colors and tree shapes in my Tree Clinic course. Once again, thank you to those of you who have enrolled already. The Tree Clinic course, it's a limited time course, and this is my first time doing a course that's not just always available. One of my reasons for doing that is that I don't want to have dozens and dozens of courses on my learning site. So my learning site will become a little bit more about having some larger serious courses that are fixed on a certain topic or subject. And then these periodic mini courses, I'd like to do one every other month. I'd love to do it every month, but I just don't think I have the time. And then we'll cover different subjects. Next month, or in June, when I launch the next course, I'm hoping to do a little bit more about abstracts, focusing on florals and just painting florals in a loose and kind of abstracted manner. So floral-ish abstracts, I guess, would be the way to phrase it. And that's all about connecting with the things that interest you about composition and value and color. And it feels very fun and self-indulgent to do. And the tree course, like I said, the enrollment is open until May 15th, 2016, and it's $30 US, $38 Canadian. And you can sign up on my website at learn.angelafehr.com between now and May 15th. And my big goal is to see 100 people signed up by the end of the day. I'd love to see that, and I think I'm already almost halfway there. And it's not even lunchtime yet, so that's pretty exciting. Okay, moving on. Questions? Anybody have some questions? Just taking a look at the chat thing. We're also there's a little bit of a delay here, so that makes it a little bit tricky for answering questions. You guys are so supportive. Thank you for your great comments. The different brands of paint, as you guys are discussing, different brands of paint do do come in different colors. You know, they're not going to match each other exactly. I've been really liking using Daniel Smith paints because a lot of times they have that dispersion that we talked about, where you can drop a color into a wet wash. Nicolazo yellow is really good, and it just starts to flow. Quinacridone magenta is one of my favorites for that. Look at that movement. It's just, that gives you those kind of wow moments. And then I like that possibility of when you have this really dark wash that's quite moist, that you can take a color like green gold or Nicolazo yellow and dot it in and have it actually push the darker colors that are underneath. That gives you incredible possibilities for just even more interesting and dynamic combinations. So I love colors that do that, but there's a little secret that you might want to know, and that is that even if you have a color that just kind of sits there blah, like this quinacridone coral, which is also from Daniel Smith, what you can do is you can add a little bit of, I think it's the ox gall, and you can buy it in a bottle from any watercolor supply store. And if you put a little dot of ox gall in your wash, it'll add that fluidity and the movement to your paint. So if you have a really dull color and you just need it to move in the context of a painting, that's what you can do. Questions here. Yes, on the number 2 broadcast, the one I'm doing this afternoon, I will be covering different material. I want you guys to be able to get the benefit of having 2 lessons today. We will go back to the simple landscape I started in this broadcast and finished it up. And I'll talk a little bit about some more discoveries I made in my watercolor workshop with my local students yesterday. And questions regarding ox gall. It's Oxgall, like gallbladder. And questions, let's see here. Just taking a look. Do you need a rigger brush for the tree course? What I really recommend is have a large round brush that comes to a nice point. You can do almost anything with a really nice pointed brush. And this one's starting to wear out, almost time to replace. But you know, I've done, for many years I didn't use a rigger brush at all. And so you can get by with just a single brush. And I think mostly in the course I go between this brush and this brush, because I just have a little bit of a crush on this unpredictable flippy body that it has. And the paper I used today is Arches, 140 pound weight. It's their cold press paper. And usually I use either exclusively Arches or Indigo art paper. And they both have different characteristics, but they both lend themselves really well to my fluid technique. You can see I didn't tape my paper down, and it held up really well. It didn't buckle a lot. It just has a little bit of a ripple here and there, but nothing that really inhibits the flow of the paint and pigment. And yeah, I really like tree number 2 as well. I had a lot of fun just changing up my technique. And it's funny, I want to just tell you guys one more time, we have amazing brains. We can take visual cues, and really you don't need much more than something like this, something like this, and then, oh, let's see here, something like this, and you're like, oh, it's a landscape painting. And it's like, seriously, that's all we need. So, and while you may not be really into super simple paintings like that, and that's a little simpler than what I would ordinarily do, but that idea that we can pick up on the subtlest visual cues to say, you know what, that's a tree, that's an evergreen. I like to show my students different abstract paintings, realistic type abstracts. So you look at it and it's an abstract, but you know it's a city, and you know it's a landscape, you know it's people. And it's amazing how subtle those visual cues can be. And that gives us the freedom to express the shape and texture of our objects in ways that please us, and yet still, you know, we can still look at it and go, oh, yeah, I know what that is. and we can still pick up on those visual cues and know what we're looking at. So that gives us freedom to be really expressive in our painting and keep changing up our style to simplify and to make things more interesting. I'm going to pull over one more painting. I wasn't going to pull this out, but here it is. This is what I did last night with my local class, and it needs a few little touch-ups, but this is where I made that little discovery of that swiping downward with the brush to get those interesting shapes. And so up here, the top of the tree, it's got the kind of older, my usual style, which is this kind of calligraphy, almost looks like Japanese writing or something. And then all of a sudden I started creating these other dry brush strokes with the side of the brush and got really excited and started working with that. And that was so much fun to do. And I'm going to be exploring that whole concept more throughout, just throughout as I paint more trees. And I love seeing the primary colors as well here in this scene. I've got blue, I've got red, I've got yellow, and they all combine to make a beautiful and interesting tree. My next video will be at 5 p.m. Today Pacific time, which is actually 6 or 5 hours from now because it's just about noon here. And the recording will be available on my YouTube channel, yes. So do check back for that. It doesn't take them long to process it and get it available after we end this broadcast. Once again, my online tree clinic, where you will also learn we'll be painting some summer trees, the summer oak. I do weeping willow or trees with Spanish moss, kind of that loose and flowing style. We do evergreens, we do a winter oak, and I talk a lot about just interpretation, how to take the complex shape of a tree, how to work it into a landscape, how to simplify it so you can paint it more expressively. And that will all be on my tree clinic course, available on my website at learn.angelafehr.com. So thank you, everybody. I will be back in just a few hours. I'm going to go feed my family, and we've got all kinds of errands to run. It's a busy day, but I'm really looking forward to the broadcast at 5 as well. So I'll see you then. And thank you very much for checking in. I really enjoy having you guys here in my studio. Even though you can't actually physically be here, this is the next best thing.